Hello everyone, this is Johanna Vásquez. Welcome to this video about the book Big Black Stand at Attica by Jared Raymond and Frank B. Black. This review is divided into 4 parts: summary, authors, stylistic characteristics, and thematic discussion. I'm going to start with a short summary. The book narrates Big Black Smith's life from childhood, the son of a poor single mother whose parents had been slaves, sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security prison for robbery, a disproportionate sentence for a first offense. He was well liked by his fellow inmates, for whom he also served as football coach. Although he was of the disturbing of the riot, he was approached by its leader to take on the security chief role, since they figured inmates would listen to him and stay in the line, both because of his level-headedness as well as his massive physique. This made him a sought-after target for retaliation by the police and prison guards who carried out the slaughter. The story is developed in 1971 in New York's Attica State Prison. This prison housed about 2,300 men, far exceeding its maximum capacity. They were only allowed 1 shower a week and were provided with a bar of soap and a roll of toilet paper each month, 1 sheet for each day. They were given only 2 liters of water a day, which they also had to use for personal hygiene. They went hungry, since the state invested little money for food. This racial discrimination led them to rebuild themselves, and this incident was a symbol of much that was broken in America: rampant racism and a blind eye turned toward injustices perpetrated on the powerless. When the guards at Attica overreacted to a minor incident, the prisoners decided they had enough and revolted against their jailers, taking them hostage and making demands for humane conditions. The attempt to negotiate was only in good faith on the part of the inmates' correctional officers, with the approval of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and U.S. President Richard Nixon, launched an all-out attack on the prison on September 13th. Helicopters bombarded the prison with tear gas, after which officers opened fire with shotguns and stormed the gates. What followed was a massacre. Correctional officers' ranks had been reinforced by volunteer police officers and local white supremacists, many of them armed with explosive ammunition and other weapons. They deliberately shot to kill and proceeded to torture and murder prisoners who gave up. They did not distinguish between prisoners and hostages. Authorities had already accepted that the hostage would likely be killed during the attack and would blame inmates for their murders. By the time the dust settled, 128 inmates had been shot and 29 prisoners and 9 hostages had been killed. Those events were so atrocious acts of brutality. Officers were shooting indiscriminately, smashing incumbents' heads with the butts of their guns and shooting them, then sticking gun barrels in their mouth for laughter. For the victims, no medical care was made available. In some cases, for days or even weeks, one doctor was ordered not to treat a shooting victim with blood running down his face. On the other hand, the media covered up from the police officers what had really happened in this terrible event from what actually happened, omitted information about the mutilation of the prisoners' genitals. The massacre and the death were falsely blamed on the prisoners themselves. Many years after, the truth finally came out. Activists, lawyers, investigative journalists, prisoners, and their families worked as a team for many years to come and uncover the truth. Black was one of those tortured. Ironically, the officers decided to torture him for revenge might have saved his life, while other organizers were being deliberately gunned down in cold blood. Big Black Smith, who led the improvised security team for prisoners during the occupation and played a key role in protecting the hostage. After her release in 1973, he became a substance abuse counselor. He later studied to be a paralegal and worked as a legal investigator for defense attorneys. He also became a tireless activist for prison reform. All this massacre generated terrible and brutal consequences for him. The violence he experienced was heartbreaking.
Hello everyone, it's Valentina and I'm going to talk about the authors. Frank Big Black Smith was a former inmate at Attica prison who was tortured by officers following the deadly 1971 uprising. After his release from prison, he kicked a drug addiction and worked as a substance abuse counselor. He also devoted his life to becoming the voice of his fellow prisoners in a 26-year lawsuit against New York State. Smith later became an advocate for the forgotten victims of Attica, a group comprised of surviving hostages and relatives of the prison guards who were believed to have been encouraged to accept limited benefits, which barred them from suing the state. Smith married in 1983, started to be a paralegal, and worked as an investigator for lawyers. He passed away at 70 years old in Houston after a long battle with cancer. He is survived by his wife, Pearl. Jared Raymond has worked as an actor, writer, teacher, director, and songwriter. Jared began his writing collaboration with Frank Big Black Smith in 1997 while assisting his stepfather, famed Attica attorney Dan Meyers. In 2017, at the suggestion of friend and colleague Patrick Kennedy, he joined forces with Pierre Bartley Smith and artist MSN to turn Frank's vision into the graphic novel Big Black, Stand at Attica. And also in 2017, Jared began his musical collaboration with Alex Toussaint, songwriting original music to accompany the book and further.
Hello, this is Vannesa, and I'm going to share with you some information about the stylistic characteristics. In the first place, this literary work, being a graphic novel, is narrative in nature since it tells a story based on real events. The characterization is so realistic that it offers the reader a real vision of society, characters, and the situation. The characters are drawn very realistically, and the dialogues of the novel are intense and alive, so that the reader knows perfectly how the character thinks and their way of being. In addition, it is highly descriptive since the descriptions are detailed and meticulous, illustrating the space, clothes, and gestures of each character. The images are very crude, and all the visual components make the reader feel and live what perhaps the character felt. One of the most impressive parts of the graphic novel is its use of a limited color palette to an outstanding dramatical effect. Most of the coloring consists of black and white hues, but when other colors are employed, they help enhance the intensity of many of the sequences. Some noteworthy examples of this include how red emphasizes the violence of a scene, and blue is saved for the more morose bits. Big Black, Stand at Attica, touches upon a significant chapter in history often ignored, and does so with painstaking excellence. It is recommended as required reading to anyone who cares about U.S. or Black history and social justice.
Now we are going to discuss three important aspects: penal system failures, guarantees in prison, and possible solutions for this.
Penal system failures. The failures of the penal system has been a widely documented issue and is a situation known to the government and citizens. One of the flaws that are manifested are mainly racism and mass incarceration. Not for nothing is the news that account for the inhuman living conditions to which people are subjected in prisons, or those that are they report over and over again. The problem of health and overcrowding that occurs in prisons. These aspects to be highlighted negatively, such as the racism that was strongly experienced in the 70s in Attica prison and that is still maintained in many contexts worldwide. On the other hand, we have mass incarceration, which is not far from our reality at all. The large number of people in a cell and the unsustainability of the prison system. Another fault that occurs in Attica prison system is the lack of resources for the personal hygiene of the prisoners. This was one of the great aspects that led the prisoners of Attica in 1971 to rebel against the system. And despite having happened more than 15 years ago, it is a situation that continues to arise in our country and in other prisons.
As my partner mentioned, the prison system is absolutely broken, and it's troubling how much the social issues of today look the same as they did 50 years ago. This piece of history needs to be read to wake up and realize that we have failed as a humanity and that the inhuman condition of the prisoner still exists. American prisons also have the profit factor, where inmates work for very low wages and even for what is essentially free. The inmates demanded for 15 practical proposals which seek to improve the guarantees within the prison, such as improvements in education, work, and food system. Although the state is supposed to preserve the lives of people deprived of the liberty in dignified conditions, it is clear that these rights are not enforced. Currently, there are extensive regulation at the national and international level on human rights systems and standards in relation to the work of prison officials, which highlight rights such as right to a decent quality of life, right to health, to education, to work, the right not to be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, and right to food. Paradoxically, there are the same rights for which they were claimed 50 years ago and about which we are currently hearing in prisons, not only in the United States, but also in our country where human rights are not enforced. Prisons shouldn't be inhumane. It is supposed to be a resting place for people who break the rules, with the worst violent offenders cut off from the rest of society. Accomplishing this doesn't require inhumane behavior.
Possible solutions. The Attica prison riot in 1971 serves as a reminder of the dangers of a failing prison system. In this still troubled day and age, most of the social issues addressed in this book continue to remain relevant as the mass incarceration and recidivism rates exponentially rise among racial minority groups due to institutional prejudices and barriers within the criminal justice system. It gives the timeline to a minorities groups that are all too often either overlooked or vilified, especially in the comics industry. Afro-descendants and prisoners, the latter of which are generally regarded as one of the lowest of repulsive degenerates who are not deserving of even the tiniest sliver of sympathy or humanity. This is as shown here with unrelenting honesty as the prisoners at the cell are denied basic survival commodities, decency, including lack of medical attention, unpaid labor, one shower a week, and a soap a month. Whenever the US government holds itself out as a defender of freedom and human rights, people should cringe because it isn't. Present-day mass incarceration, police brutality, gun violence, and racism show that the US certainly isn't the wonderful example of democracy that it says it is. Like many other countries in the world today, the US has feet of clay and an underbelly of injustice. Many countries have this. One of the ways to confront this issue is to recognize different views of history and listen to the story of the powerless and the marginalized in history. In this way, the lessons from history can be heard and learned, and steps can be taken to make society more just. That should be the work of governments, but many times it isn't. Besides, increasing the participation of volunteers, community groups, and NGOs in order to provide valuable programs to inmates. Even when space is limited, volunteer participation contributes to a better mood and reduces the inactivity of the inmates. Governments should take an interest in training staff members in basic relational skills, including effective communication, respectful and human relationship development, anger management, and conflict mediation. This will improve the morale of the staff and inmates. As sanitation, hygiene, and kitchen facilities become inadequate to serve a growing prison population, the health of staff and inmates is put at risk, making it more difficult to contract contagious diseases. Improving sanitation is an important factor in mitigating problems in prisons. Organizing and training inmates on preventing health care, including basic sanitation, food preparation, and personal hygiene. The US is powerful in some ways, but so was Rome. In history, kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall, but in the midst of this history, individuals find ways to live against the tides of oppression and brutality that are so common in our world today. This is an excellent graphic novel because it gives us the chance to focus on the life of one of such individuals. This graphic novel is an excellent portrayal of a story that reminds us that justice, fairness, and human rights need to be the bedrock of any country that holds itself out as being great. The idea of having the Attica prison riot played out through a graphic novel doesn't seem like the obvious choice, but after consuming this, it is interesting to be able to witness rather than have a scene described. It makes the reader feel closer to the story and the people that were part of it. The Attica prison riot was a terrible event, and through the eyes of Big Black, it should become only more heartbreaking. The many pages of violent, racist, building-eyed police officers gunning down and torturing black prisoners are rough to read. But the actual story of this event is marred and stilted dialogue, talking heads, and random bits of Bill Black's narration. Still, it's a particularly useful book to drive home some of the history of mass incarceration of Black Americans, and an important story to be aware of.
Thanks for paying attention. We hope you like it. Don't forget to follow the link and play.